Hi, I'm Kathie Nurena, and I'm here with Linda Randall and Jen Rogers. We were preparing for the Lemonade conference and looking at the different topics, and we're really interested. Linda and I are presenting together, so really interested in how the topics can really affect each other. Linda and I are talking about trauma in various aspects in the medical office, and I talk about trauma-informed care and how that can impact a medical encounter. So Linda, are there ways in which that kind of resonates or means something for you for the veterinary medical visits?
Yeah, it does. And I think as we're all kind of finding our way through this COVID period, the interesting thing to me was that, at least in my practice, I found that once we started curbside service, we had apparently less stressed animals coming into the hospital. They were appeared to be a little bit nervous being taken away from their car and their person, especially if they'd been out there for a while, doing whatever people were doing in the car, and everybody's all comfy and cozy. And then they're kind of torn apart. So there was a little bit of, you can see in the tail set of a dog, or the ears, or the cat just doing something like that. But once they were in the office and we were examining them and doing things that we would normally do with them, I'm not talking about surgical procedures and all of that, they relaxed. Or I feel that a lot more of them that we had written right on their chart to be careful, to do this first, do that second, make sure you have lots of treats, which we always have anyway, but and all that wasn't coming into play as much. And my staff commented on it. What I'm seeing in the veterinary literature, however, doesn't support that in other practices. And I'm not sure at the moment what the difference is, but that's how it's resonating with me at the moment.
Interesting. Yeah. Kind of a different perspective.
Yeah.
And Jen, you have a perspective which I find fascinating with service animals. And we see a lot with service animals and some emotional needs in the human with things like PTSD. How is that, resonating with you?
Yeah, so for me, it's a very different experience looking at the other end of the leash, or the human end of it. My charity Pals trains dogs for a lot of different types of disabilities, but the one that resonates during this conversation with me is the folks that we serve with PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder. I spent a lot of time during COVID in particular, kind of coaching and trying to relieve the anxiety via phone, Zoom calls, while the person left behind in the car during a curbside pickup was really having a terrible time while their dog was being treated inside the vet clinic. When we normally place partnerships together, we encourage the partner to stay with the dog during the healthcare routines whenever possible. And part of that is because they've been trained specifically how to do handling that helps to keep the dog calm and themselves calm. But I always tell people that the leash is like an electric plug, right? So it's a two-way communication. When you're either holding a dog or touching them or touching their leash, if you have a lot of anxiety, that definitely travels down the leash to the dog, or down the touch to the dog, and vice versa. So I think it's important to look at both. I think for some of our people, it was incredibly challenging and really disorienting to not know what was going on with their service partner when they couldn't be with them. And so we had to do a lot of extra support for individuals in those situations.
Yeah, it's interesting that when we brought the animals back to the car, sometimes we would find people crying in the car, or just not shaking exactly, but you could tell very, very tense and nervous, wanting to know everything that went on, which of course, and this isn't going to sound exactly like I would love it to sound, but taking it from a business point of view, we then were working with that person, and our 40-minute, half-hour veterinary visit was over an hour. And then you've got more people backed up in their cars waiting in the parking lot as we try to work through all of that. And what we started to do, and what a lot of veterinarians are doing with curbside service, is videoing, just taking that camera and just walk through the visit, that as if that camera, that phone is the person.
It's really nice and really interesting. It seems like in both cases, I'm only imagining bringing my animal to the vet and having a relationship with that vet who I trust would make that separation a little bit easier. And Jen, it's so nice that your clients have that relationship where they can be supported through that added extra stress.
Yeah,
And
yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to say too, in our process, when we're placing dogs with individuals with disabilities, we actually have them go meet the vet that have been caring for their dog, even if they're not going to stay with them, so that, you know, they get to experience that with a trainer supporting them, how to, you know, really handle a vet visit. And most of them go in very anxious, even ones who don't have trauma in their background, because it can be a bit nerve-wracking, and are really pleasantly surprised to see what a good experience it could be with a trained animal and a veterinary staff who's been basically taught to be cooperative with the handling techniques that we use. And so I think that made a big difference for a lot of our teams, and the Zoom calls and the video conferencing were lifesavers for so many of them during those challenging times, and still are, you know, as we go through this together still.
Yeah, I think there was some agency there when we were doing, which was essentially a Facebook Live. I mean, it was a two-way. It wasn't just a video on your camera. It was so that the person could also talk to us and ask if we could do something a different way or that kind of thing. But I will also say, again, from a business point of view, that meant that in the background, before we did all of this, I had to work with my staff to say, simple things, watch your facial expressions, watch this, watch that. You know, if somebody's asking you to do something that you think is completely off the wall, so what? And it can't show up. And so that became teaching them sometimes how to act, as in acting, and sometimes just how to be a better person internally and how to accept how things are happening. So it is so big. It's so much more than, you know, trauma on the person side, trauma on the animal side, and then you've got trauma on the veterinarian side, and then you've got all that staff. And it becomes really big, much bigger whole than I think people realize when we've got this surface running.
Well, and I could kick it up a little bit bigger in that, you know, we also had a lot of scenarios where it wasn't a vet appointment, but a human health appointment or even an emergency visit. And that was quite challenging.
Oh my
It's already
gosh.
a bit of a challenge with people with disabilities and their service dogs entering, you know, an emergency situation at a hospital for a loved one or themselves, but then kick in a pandemic where, you know, no one's allowed into certain areas depending on what the situation was. And so we had a lot of that too to offer support, and it was really tough at times. But again, the technology is a blessing again in the scenarios. And so a little bit of education to our health professionals can go a really long way to help people who are really suffering through that.
yes, I think this has been a great example of how these topics really do affect each other, and how coming together and talking a little bit can be so valuable. So
Yeah,
thank you both.
definitely. Oh, thank you. And I'm hoping that anybody listening to this that has anything to say will get in touch with any of us and come to our talks. And if anybody has any thoughts on research or ways to look into this, I think that this field that we're talking about, which is actually fields with an S, is just growing, and there's something new out every month. Okay.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Jen.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.